back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
Thank you for all the support recently on our podcast episodes and shorts. Your support does not go unnoticed, and please continue to support us by liking, subscribing, and commenting on this video. But before we get into business, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. For the first order of business for the podcast today, we've got a special return. Kevin Durant, he came back from his injury against the Timberwolves. March 29th is when he came back. He played 30 minutes, 16 points, 5 for 18, 2 for 4 from 3, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists. I watched the whole game, and to be honest, it was kind of what I expected, a slow and steady return. I believe they did win. Yeah, they did win. But it was a case where, Phoenix looked good, but Durant didn't look great, Chris Paul, his signature was like all over the second half. D-Book was putting up really good points and, easy buckets. And in their defense, it was against the Timberwolves, which aren't the best team in the league, but, they're solid. But, they had been dealing with some, I think it was a flu bug or something like that. So, those guys were kind of reeling from that. I know Ant Edwards had 39, or something around that. But yeah, with Kevin Durant, it was interesting because he missed a lot of shots, as you can clearly tell. He shot 5 for 18, but I don't think this is anything to worry about. I think this is just growing pains, and he's coming back from an injury, so it's simple as that for me. What about you?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we talked about it before, in a lot of previous podcasts that the superpower that he has in a way is that he can usually come back from injuries and not really be rusty at all. But of course, as it turns out, this was actually a relatively rusty performance from him. I think because I watched most of the game too, and I think they said in the broadcast because he started, I think 0 for 5, 0 for 6, and I think they said it was only the third time in his career that he had ever had a game where he started off that poorly. So I kind of let you know it's kind of a rare game, but kind of like you said, despite the fact that he didn't play that great, they still ended up winning. By 7 points. They were down for a good chunk of the game, but late in the game, right? Paul, Booker, even Ayton, and Durant, right? Those guys started to, kind of pick it up late in the game. Minnesota had won 4 in a row, right? They had kind of been streaking and playing pretty well.
Yeah.
Towns is back. Like you said, he was pretty good. Right? He had 25 and 8, 5 of 10 from 3. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where he was killing them for good chunks of the game. But then you still had issues kind of late in the game, right, where you still have Towns and Gobert kind of clumsily trying to defend, against a smaller-ish team. One of Towns or Gobert kind of has to defend Durant, right? And that's not necessarily an ideal situation to put them in. But, we had kind of talked about if Phoenix is healthy, they should be pretty good. Obviously there's still kind of some concerns about some of the role players, right? Because obviously Okogie's been pretty good, right? But then you have other guys, right? Like, just you got to rely on Cameron Payne, which doesn't feel ideal, right? Terrence Ross can be hit or miss, right? Same with guys like T.J. Warren, Torrey Craig, Biyombo, right? So Monty Williams definitely has kind of like a tall task ahead of him to try to figure out like what the right guys are to play during the playoffs. But obviously, this is a big win, right? Because we've been talking about it for a while now. The standings are so tight; every win matters at this point. Every game matters at this point, right? And Phoenix, kind of needs to stay, in that top 4, right? And they were kind of trending towards maybe falling out of that, right, with the Durant injury because they had started dropping games while he was out. But he came back, I think, a little earlier than some people expected, right? Maybe that's why he was kind of rusty.
Right.
But regardless, it definitely helps because they need him to win a lot of these games because their schedule's not super easy the rest of the way, but regardless, it's good to have him back, right? Obviously, because they need him for the stretch run ultimately.
Yeah, and I think this was his home debut, I believe. So it wasn't too great for him, but for the Suns, I think it was a good game. Not too much to say. Like I said, I'm not concerned. I don't know if you're concerned, but I think come playoff time when they really, really, really need him, I don't think we'll be dealing with, too many more games like this.
Right. Of all the guys on the Suns, he's the guy I would be least concerned about.
Exactly.
I mean, he's their best player. He has a history of showing up in the playoffs. I know it wasn't great for him last year
Yeah.
against Boston, but, regardless, he's the guy I would be least concerned about.
Right.
We had talked about it before. You're
Yeah.
not really concerned about Durant.
Right.
Unless, as long as he's healthy, of course.
Yeah.
I guess the only concern you have is the injury stuff. But if he's on the court, there's no concerns.
Yeah. None from me.
Yeah. So I guess moving on into our next segment, we kind of just wanted to just shout out some really big performances over, the last few days, right? Drew Holiday the other night had 51 points. Career high 51 points, right? Against the Indiana Pacers, but still regardless, right? A great game is a great game no matter who you play against.
Right.
He's had a great season. He was an all-star, right, for the second time in his career, I think, and it was the first time since 2013, 14, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long time coming. He's still, he's generally been one of the better, more underrated guards in the league. And with Middleton, kind of being in and out of the lineup, he's had to step it up this season, and he's definitely, delivered on that. He's pretty much been their second best player for the whole season. When you consider what he can do on both ends of the floor, I think that's something to be respected.
Yeah, I agree with you. 51 is crazy. First of all, that's an accomplishment in itself, and a lot of people wrote him off, and I was definitely one of them because I'd completely really forgotten that he's that good of a player. One of the best two ways in the game, but it's interesting because you were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, so if you want to explain that whole Mickey Mouse March thing that you were talking about, just you don't have to go in depth, but just give the people some context.
Right. Yeah. So moving on into these next couple of performances. So obviously, no disrespect to these players, but there had kind of been a thing that people had normally stated a lot of times towards the end of the season, right, when teams are out of it. Especially like a lot of the guys on the bad teams, right? This is kind of when you just see kind of random guys, pop off for really big nights. Where you're like, wow, I wouldn't have seen that coming, right? So PJ Washington, right? Good player, right? Solid player. But he had 43 against the Oklahoma City Thunder, right?
Right.
Which was kind of it was a weird stretch, right? Charlotte won 3 games in a row, 2 against Dallas.
Right.
And then obviously this one against Oklahoma City. No Shea, but still, Charlotte at this point is pretty much a skeleton crew. But these are the kind of examples we're talking about, right? 43 points, 16 of 24 shooting, 5 of 9 from 3. Right on the season average is 16 and 5, right? So having a pretty solid season, on a team that's not very good.
Right.
But regardless, when so many guys are out, right, it kind of makes sense that you're just gonna have random guys, that on these bad teams that just kind of pop off, where you're like, wow, I wouldn't have expected this. It's just kind of be interesting to see, if some of these guys can continue to keep it up.
Yeah, and nonetheless, they're in the NBA, so it's like, it is an accomplishment to put up these astonishing point totals, but it is that time of the year where a lot of the bad teams do end up giving up. So that just some context.
Yeah, and then unlike and in this case, unlike Charlotte, right? We have Utah, right, who's still kind of in the mix, even though they've been reeling, they've had injuries. But THT, right, Taylor Horton Tucker, former Laker, right, he had a 41-point outing against the San Antonio Spurs, right, against the Spurs, but still, right, still an impressive night.
Exactly.
15 to 25 from the field, 6 of 11 from 3, which is interesting because he's not generally been that good of an outside shooter. Obviously he was kind of a name in the offseason, right? Because he was the guy that was the Lakers swapped out for Patrick Beverley, right? A move that didn't necessarily work out, but he's a young guy, right? He's still 21, 20.
I think so.
I think.
Yeah, I think he's 22. Yeah.
22. Yeah, I think 22 turns 23 at the end of the year, so still really young. The splits are still not really great, so long term, I don't necessarily know, right? But at this point, given the fact that so many of Utah's other guys are out, the ball's in his hands. He can kind of just do whatever he wants. But still, an impressive outing.
Yeah. He's shown flashes multiple times. You as a Laker fan can definitely confirm that. And like we were talking about in probably, I think, one of our first episodes ever, we were talking about how crazy scoring has been. So, regardless of the time of the year, it is crazy that these guys are putting up numbers, and it might be guys that you've never even heard of due to the fact that it's this time of the year, we haven't really heard Horton Tucker really make a lot of noise or make waves, ever since he really kind of moved, so it's cool to see.
exactly. And then just another final shout out, right? Russell Westbrook, who we had talked about previously, right? Right. So in a game against Memphis, right, both teams kind of had guys out, right? For the Clippers, no Kawhi, no Paul George, right? Because Paul George is done for the regular season.
Yeah.
Right. For Memphis, no Desmond Bain, no Jaren Jackson Jr. But goes off for a pretty big game, 36 points, 10 assists. 13 of 18 from the field, 5 of 5 from 3, right, which is generally not usually what he does.
A little
I
uncharacteristic.
think overall, yeah, I think overall he's played well for the Clippers. He's been more efficient. And that kind of comes with like what we said, right, in terms of, the Clippers, right, having just better spacing overall because they just got better shooters than LA. But, still at the same time, right, they're still doing it in a way that we kind of thought they should be doing where he's not necessarily playing a ton of minutes. Obviously, he had to tonight or last night
Right.
because Kawhi and Paul George are out, but still, it's not like he's playing 35 minutes a night, right? I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think he's, around 30. And he's had some games like when they had Kawhi and Paul George where he was like in the, mid low 20s. But I guess at this point without Paul George, his minutes are probably going to have to go up. But again, right? Like in these type of situations, right, where you just kind of need him to just have like a pretty good game, against a solid team, sometimes he can have these nights.
Yeah. And I think, this is what they brought him in for was, if somebody goes down, he's there to, command the offense a little bit more, and help what they lost. With Paul George, I know you can't really compare Russell Westbrook to Paul George, but it's going to make a difference because, Westbrook, he's not the greatest player anymore, but he still provides a huge impact that doesn't get talked about enough. So, I'm happy for him that he dropped these points and, is quietly shushing the haters. So, if it can continue come playoffs, I think, we could be seeing him right the ship on his career narrative too.
Shout out to our, previous guest, our first guest from, an earlier podcast, Genji.
Yeah, Genji.
Right. Who mentioned, that he thought that the Westbrook fit, would work fine. Right.
Yeah.
And it honestly has. So, I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah.
Where credit is due. Obviously,
sure.
we'll stop to see what happens come playoff time. But for now, I think it's been better than what I think some people expected.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments if you want to see Genji back. Just let us know. But moving on into our next segment, this is an interesting one, I think, because it's one that's not really talked about as much. But, come playoff time is, right around the corner. So we wanted to get our dark horses out there for each conference. So the way it's going to work is we each have one team from each conference that we're going to talk about and explain why we think they're the dark horse for that conference. So to start in the East, I'm going to kick it off with the Miami Heat. With the Miami Heat, it's interesting because they're sitting currently at 40-37. They're on a 3-game losing streak. They haven't played as well as they were about a couple weeks ago, but they're quietly a really good team in my opinion. They've got about 3 guys that average around 20. So you got Jimmy Butler, Bam, and Tyler Hero. Then you've got, some interesting guys coming off the bench or not even, some of them are coming off the bench, but a lot of them are kind of role players. You got Kyle Lowry, you got Oladipo, Struss, Caleb Martin, they're all averaging around 10 to 11. I just think it's a solid team, and I think Eric Spoelstra, you can't count him out because he is a great coach. Jimmy Butler, come playoff time, he turns into a different animal. Bam's got a lot to prove. I just think this team has the capabilities and probably the best chance to upset, whoever they end up playing. So, come playoff time, I'm curious to see who they'll be playing. I believe it'll be, who would it be? Would it be?
Well, right now they're in the play-in.
Yeah,
so,
they are in the play-in. Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
But they're the 7th seed. So if they win, then they'll be the 7th seed and they'll probably face Boston. Assuming, that if Boston keeps the 2 seed. But you don't know because, in fairness,
Yeah.
not to cut you off or anything, but like since Boston blew out Milwaukee tonight, right? They have the tiebreaker,
Right.
so they may be able to catch the Bucks for the number 1 seed. I don't know. We'll have to see, but
Nah, yeah, you're
go
all
ahead.
good. Sorry, I blanked out on the play and I completely forgot that that was even a thing. But yeah. So if they eventually have to go into the play-in, and then it'll be a tough climb if they have to fight Boston. But it's funny, in one of our more recent episodes, I did mention it was a playoff matchup that I wanted to see, which was the Heat versus Celtics, because I think it's going to be fireworks everywhere, and I think it's going to be a fun one because we've seen it before, and it was pretty interesting the last time it happened. So
It
I
went the
think
distance, 7 games.
exactly. So I think this could be a really good series, and I think the Heat do have a small chance at beating or upsetting, Boston, but we'll see what goes down. I don't know what your
Yeah,
thoughts on that are.
yeah. My thing for Miami is I feel like it would probably be a little bit easier to feel like they're a dark horse if they can get to 6, if they can
Right.
avoid the play-in, just because they'll go against Philly, and obviously Embiid's a tough matchup for them, right? But at
Right.
the same time, right, Butler has played relatively well against Philly in the past, right? Obviously, like you mentioned in the playoffs, he's been one of the best playoff performers in the league. So I mean, for them right now, because they're in the play-in, that makes it difficult, right? They were on track to be the 6th seed, but then, like you mentioned, they lost 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of been just a strange season for them, right? Because they've had injuries, right? Kyle Lowry has just not been the same at all, right?
Right.
It felt like he was kind of on the decline last year, right? And it feels like that's accelerated even more, right? He's basically been coming off the bench, battling injuries. He's missed a ton of time, right? Hero's been fine. He's been okay. Bam's been awesome, obviously. Butler's been really good. It just, I don't know. It feels like you're kind of just left wanting a little bit more from them.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, because they were really good last year, right? They were the number 1 seed in the East despite injuries. And then they, were very close to upsetting the Celtics, right, in the conference finals, right? That definitely would have been an upset, right? Jimmy Butler makes that 3. And they end up potentially going to the finals. So it's a good pick. I don't know. Miami just hasn't been as consistent this year, and I do kind of feel like if they're in the play-in, right, it may be a tough outing against Boston, especially because Boston, I feel like, has looked much better recently.
Yeah.
With Robert Williams coming back and playing better. I don't know, but if I don't know if they can avoid the play-in, I think it's definitely a dark horse. But I think it might be a tough ask to ask them to upset Boston in round 1.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying about Kyle Lowry not being, playing the greatest recently. It was funny because I saw an article earlier, it was by Brad Sullivan from Heat Nation. Basically said the Heat weren't expecting this version of Kyle Lowry. They thought they were getting an all-star point guard. That's just kind of interesting to me because that sounds like an excuse. Because he was already going up in age, so the decline was inevitable. So it just sounds like Miami's making excuses here, and you can't do that. You can't pin that on one player. It's a collective effort. They're not succeeding as a team. It's not because Kyle Lowry's trash. Like that's the narrative they're trying to spin, and I'm not cool with that. I just wanted to put that out there. But, they are my dark horse. I think if they can rally the troops and get it together, they could potentially upset the nasty Boston Celtics if they get out of the play.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of put a bow on the Lowry thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it just kind of feels like it might have just been a mistake, when they
Yeah.
made that deal in last offseason to get him, because like you mentioned, right, he's pretty up there in age, right? I think he's played what 16, 17 seasons,
Yeah.
right? Mid late 30s basically, right? Small guard. Those type of guys typically don't really age all that well, and you're
Burn
just
out
kind of
quick.
seeing it, right? Like he
Yep.
doesn't really get to the line like he used to. He's no longer as quick. But like you said, right? It's like that's not an excuse, because again, you still have other good players. But
Exactly.
obviously, I just think at the end of the day, it was probably just a mistake to
Yeah.
make that deal. I think it's just a gamble, right? Like it's a gamble when you sign an older player. Sometimes you just have to expect, right? Those type of guys are just going to miss games.
Yeah. I 100%
And if
agree.
they yeah, and then of course the ultimate danger, right, is if they might just kind of just be done, which maybe
Right.
he might just be.
Right.
But again, that's kind of the gamble you take when you sign, an aging player.
Right.
Yeah. So moving on to my dark horse for the East, I got the Cleveland Cavaliers,
Okay.
right? So they've been, towards the top of the league in defensive rating for the whole year,
For
right?
sure.
They've been, in the top 10 offensively for pretty much the whole year, right? They've won 7 of their last 10,
Right.
right? They got a great backcourt with Garland and Donovan Mitchell, right? Mitchell's kind of at this point, right, uh, reemerged, I guess, as the closer, superstar type of guy, right? Right, maybe a level right below the superstar, right? Because I feel like towards the end in Utah, it felt like people were starting to kind of look
Write him
down on
off.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, write him off. But he's been great for Cleveland, right? Obviously, he's helped them offensively. They still have stretches where they don't look great on offense, right? And that's because the Mobley Allen fit is still kind of weird at times, just because neither of them are really shooting threats.
Right.
Mobley's been really good as of late, right? It feels like he's really, peaking, in terms of his sophomore, right? He's been great,
Yeah.
on both ends of the floor, right? Picking it up on offense and defense. But uh, and again, unlike say the Miami Heat, right? Right now they're the 4 seed. So they've been, pretty good for most of the season. Obviously, they were great to start the season, right? They kind of tapered off a little bit, right? They just haven't been that great on the road. They've been great at home, so that's obviously a concern. But in the first round, obviously, they're going to be at home, right? Against the Knicks, right? So that should be a series that they should win, especially given that we had heard that Julius Randle's probably going to be out
Yeah.
for a couple weeks, at
It's a
least
big
the rest of the
factor.
regular season. Yeah, so kind of similar to the Paul George situation.
Right.
If they were to come out of the first round, right, obviously they'd probably face, right, either Milwaukee or Boston, whoever's the number 1 seed. And that's obviously a tough ask. But again, they got size, in the front court. They got athleticism. So they have a chance. My concern, obviously, has always been for them the whole year is just the wings. They don't really have a lot of great wing options, and that's probably going to be their undoing. But again, with a great backcourt and a really good front court, I mean, they if Mitchell really rises to the occasion and is one of the 2 best players on the floor, right? I mean, they got a really good chance, at maybe making an upset.
Yeah, and you already know I was high on Cleveland, so I'm just gonna basically be echoing everything you said. But I think the only concern that I have with them is technically their bench. And like you said, the wing guys. I'm not sold on Isaac Okoro yet. I'm not sold on LeVert at all. To take from you said a scorer that can't score. Like that. That's not going to really get you anywhere in the playoffs, unfortunately, because he doesn't defend either. So like with Cleveland, I think we're going to be seeing Donovan Mitchell have to shoulder the load alongside Garland. I'm not sure what Garland's going to be able to do because I think this is going to be his first playoff appearance.
Yep.
So I'm curious to hear about that or see it actually. And then with Jared Allen and Mobley, it seems like the chemistry is there, but it's not solidified completely. And I think with this team, just give them time. I think it's too early for them to be considered contenders, unfortunately. But I think in the next year or two, we could easily see them be a top 3 seed every season as long as this group of guys is together. But I'm really high on them, but I just can't see them, winning the whole thing. And I know you're not saying that they're going to win the whole thing, obviously. But I think they're a great dark horse candidate because I think they could pull off some magic, but I don't know how far that magic is going to get them.
If they can figure out the wing situation in the offseason, I think they have a real chance at being a contender in the East.
Because they're really good.
Yeah. So I guess now it's you, right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was drinking water. Yeah, so moving on into the West, my dark horse is Minnesota. And I know everyone's going to be like, well, why do you choose Minnesota? They've had one of the weirdest seasons, I think,
Yeah.
Considering Cat got injured, I think that was fairly early. But I think, with
December.
Yeah, so like it's been a rough season for them, but they did end up trading D'Lo away, and I think that's something that's not talked about enough because that can put you in a rut, and I think they've kind of risen to the occasion because they've played really well. Ant Edwards has basically taken over and said, this is my team, without Karl Anthony Towns. And I think, Cat I'm not going to say he's come to terms with it, but it seems like he's playing around that. But the only thing that I don't like about Minnesota, I think, is probably Gobert, if I'm going to be honest. Because I think Gobert, And I think it's just the offense. Like, I don't know. It just seems like he tries to do too much, if you know what I'm trying to get at. But with the reason why they're my dark horse is because they've been through a lot, and I think adversity makes teams a lot better come playoff time. It could be a magical story. I think they're currently sitting at the seventh seed. Yeah, 39 and 38. So, they have potential. I know they're in the play-in as well. But I think they can do it and get out of the play-in. I think they'll get out of the play-in, but I don't think they'll probably go too far. But the potential is there, like I said, with a healthy Cat, a healthy Anthony Edwards. I think this team has potential to go far.
Yeah, I think definitely the Cat injury was kind of a weird part of the season, right? Because they were really struggling, for a while with both Towns and Gobert out there, right? And then
Right,
Towns is out, and it just kind of felt like they started to kind of figure out an identity, right? Especially once they got Mike Conley, right?
right.
Of course, you had McDaniel's, who's been playing great, especially defensively. Even Edwards, right, has been
Yeah,
terrific on both ends, right? And I think we talked about it at the deadline, right, where it was like the Conley for D'Lo swap. Maybe, some people may feel like that D'Lo is a better player, but for Minnesota, just getting an adult in there, I think helps.
right,
Right, Conley's a veteran; he's been in a lot of playoff games. Wasn't necessarily great last year, for Utah, but still, regardless, right? He's just having a guy that just has been in a lot of different situations, which most of the Minnesota guys haven't been in yet. I think that's a big help, right?
for
And
sure.
also, he had chemistry with Rudy Gobert, right? So maybe they're kind of trying to figure out how to maximize the Gobert situation. Obviously, just the biggest concern is just, at the end of games, most teams tend to close with smaller lineups, and you just kind of just wonder whether or not they can guard, those small lineups effectively enough. Obviously, like ideally you'd want to punish teams with your size, right? Which Towns can do. Right, even though he's, prefers to take jumpers, right? He's still, a big athlete. But Gobert, right, isn't a super talented offensive player, right? More just a pick and roll guy right around the basket. Um, so that's obviously an issue late in games, and I think that is probably going to be their undoing.
Right.
Um, but if Edwards kind of raises his game right to another level where he just plays like a superstar, right, in the playoffs, maybe they get like a semi-favorable matchup, right? If they can get to six, it's kind of like what I feel like with the Heat. If they can get to six, I think they got a better chance at maybe
Okay.
getting out of the first round, right? Because I think they have a chance at upsetting Sacramento, even though
I think they can
Sacramento's
do it
been
with
pretty
Memphis
good.
too, though. Sorry to cut you off,
Yeah,
but I think
yeah,
they can do it with
maybe.
Memphis.
Yeah, maybe. But, at the very least, I think, given Minnesota's just size and the fact that they, I think, can defend better than Sacramento, I think they'd have a chance if they can get to six. If they're seven and they
Right.
have to play, Memphis on the road or Denver on the road, I think it's going to be really tough. But I think it's at the very least it's a decent pick, and you do feel better about them than you did earlier in the season because it
Yeah.
just felt like earlier in the season they were just awful, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like it's kind of been salvaged a little bit, but I still feel like the trade was bad. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
relent
No.
on that because I
No.
still feel like the trade was just too much to give up for Gobert.
Yeah. It was
But at the
trash.
very least, yeah, but at least it's not gonna end like in disaster, right? Because
Right.
for a while Utah was doing better than Minnesota, right? And that would have been the disaster scenario, right? Where Utah gets your own pick and their pick is better than yours, or I guess lower than yours. So that would have been really bad. But at the very least, they figured that out, and I do
Yeah.
think Conley's a big part of that.
Oh yeah. Easily.
Mhm. So my pick, it's probably going to sound kind of homerish, right? I was kind of trying to decide between the Lakers and the Pelicans, but I didn't necessarily want to sound like a flip flopper just because I
Right.
had felt like New Orleans had been, kind of a disappointment, and then they go on a win streak. But regardless, I have the Lakers. Um, they're kind of like a team that's been really enigmatic for the whole season, just
Right.
because they started the season off so awful, right? 2-10. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously they don't make the trade until the trade deadline, right, in February. And since then they've been, pretty solid despite not having LeBron for most of
Right.
the game since the deadline, despite not having D'Lo for a big chunk of the game since the deadline. Um, right, AD's been really good. I think the other night was like the first time that they, had that starting five pretty much all season, right? I think even the trio of LeBron, D'Lo, and AD had only played like 20 minutes together before
That's crazy.
the previous night. Yeah, exactly. Because initially D'Lo got hurt against Golden State, then LeBron gets hurt against Dallas. So they've been one of the best defensive teams. Offense has been kind of a concern, right? That especially made sense while LeBron was out. They debuted a new starting five, right? Where now Reeves is starting as opposed to Malik Beasley, right? And he's starting alongside LeBron, AD, D'Lo, and Vanderbilt, right? So I think it's a pretty versatile starting five, right? Where you got multiple guys that can, do a lot of things on offense. Um, the offense is ran very differently, right, than it had been in previous years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it feels like they use LeBron and AD more as, just post guys. LeBron especially has kind of converted into being more of a big
Yeah,
at
it's
this stage in
interesting.
his career, which makes sense. Yeah,
Right.
and obviously, with Vogel, they had more 3-and-D guys at the guard spot, but now they have more skill guards, which again I think makes sense. I think LeBron at this point, he can't necessarily just put anybody next to him
Right.
and you're really good. You do have to have, certain types of players. And because they've been pretty good since the deadline, if they can stay in the play-in, I think they have a pretty good shot at getting out of there, right? If they're the 7-8 seed, I think they have a good chance at being one of those two seeds. And you never know, right? Obviously, you're going to have LeBron and AD out there. I still think it's going to be a really hard ask, to ask them to beat Denver or Memphis in round one, right? I
Oh
just
yeah.
think that's going to be yeah, I think that's going to be really difficult, especially on the road. But
Right.
if both of those guys are two of the three best players on the floor with solid players, I mean, you have a shot. I think you at the very least have a shot, especially if you have a really good defense behind them, which they've had pretty much all year.
Yeah.
Well, not all year since the deadline. My bad.
Yeah. And I mean, like, with the Lakers, LeBron is on the goddamn roster, bro. Like that's why you can't count them out. I think,
Yeah,
I
kind of
don't
like what we talked about with Golden State, where I don't think either of us are out on Golden State,
exactly,
unless Wiggins doesn't come back.
exactly. And I don't think you can count them out when it comes to the play-in. For the first round, though, if they stay at 8th and, come out of the play-in and they face Denver, I don't think they're beating Denver in a 7-game
I think
series,
that's a really tough.
you know?
And I think, yeah, exactly. I feel like Denver is, kind of like what we talked about with Boston, where I feel like Denver has played much better as of late.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because for a while we were kind of, not necessarily us, but a lot of people were really, really concerned about Denver.
Yeah.
I mean, it just feels like they've kind of righted the ship as of late.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, and I was definitely one of those people who was concerned. I had Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. on question marks, and then they decided to torch my Wizards, and I was like, yeah, never mind. But
I will say this: I'm still not necessarily like 100% confident that they're going to come out of the West, though.
Oh yeah,
but I definitely feel better about them than I would have a couple weeks ago.
For sure, yeah, they've definitely. I'm not going to say solidified, but definitely improved their case of being worthy of the number 1 seed. I think for sure. But yeah, back to the Lakers. Like, I think there's a lot of guys on this roster that have a lot to prove. And I think that's probably what's going to push them through, because I don't think it's going to be coaching. I think your coach is an imbecile, if I'm being honest. It seems like he doesn't know what he's doing, Like,
yeah, I'll get into that in a little bit once you finish your thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But, like, yeah, your coach, I just don't think he knows what he's actually doing, because, there's times where he doesn't play people that should be on the floor, There's multiple times where you watch a Lakers game and you're like, huh, where's Hachimura? Where are other guys that are, deep roster guys that could really help you in crucial situations where, maybe you don't have Braun, So, and I'm sure as a Laker fan, you can speak to that better than me, but all of the games that, I've seen, huge coaching errors that kind of result in you guys losing a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's kind of another aspect, I think, where, like, this is why I would still have him in the dark horse as opposed to contender. Just because, again, with a rookie head coach, that at this point still kind of makes, some mistakes. And, for any rookie head coach can make mistakes, but, there are times where it does feel kind of concerning, right? Like the other night he had a lineup where he had all 5 guys that come off the bench. They were all in at the same time, right? So
Right.
they had built up a big lead in the first quarter against the Bulls, and then it gets whittled down pretty much entirely because he plays, an all bench unit, like
Right.
hockey, right? For like, half a quarter, right? And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily something you should be doing
No.
at any point in an NBA game.
Especially in
I
the
just think that,
situation that they're in,
yeah,
they're trying to
exactly.
win and contend.
Right. I do think that there are times where I think he does do a decent job. I think for me personally, the offense I think is where I've been the most impressed because he was kind of billed as more of a defensive coach, but I
Right.
think offensively he's done a pretty good job at kind of changing a lot of their schemes up because it was a much different scheme with Frank Vogel, right? Where it was
Right.
a little bit more simplistic, but of course you also had different players. But regardless, I still would be kind of concerned. And then just the continuity part, right? Where this is a pretty new team, right? And they just have not had a whole lot of reps together. So I feel like those two things will probably be their undoing. And again, that's why I would have them in the dark horse
Yeah.
versus contender. But again, you just and then of course, with a lot of other teams, then LeBron and AD's health, right? Because they've missed a lot of time the last few seasons, and obviously LeBron's back with his foot injury, right? But knock on wood, right? If something happens, right, he might be out, for the season.
Right.
So those concerns would kind of make me avoid picking them as a contender. But I still think at the very least they should be considered a dark horse because if they can stay in the play-in and get into the playoffs, I think they can still be a dangerous team, especially because we just haven't seen a whole lot of them yet.
Right. I think, if they could really go far, if you want me to be honest. I don't think but it's so funny because they're gonna have to, if they're in the play-in and they win the play-in, they have to face Denver. That's
Yeah.
the dark situation. If they weren't
Yeah. Well,
facing Denver in the first round, I think they could go pretty far.
well,
But
it
I don't know.
depends. Well, it depends because right now they're 8.
Right.
Could change tonight with New Orleans versus Denver, but
True.
if they're in the 7-8, right? Because this is kind of why the 7-8 versus 9-10 is crucial, right? Similar with like Miami, right? If you're in 7-8, if you win the 7-8 matchup, you're the 7 seed. So let's
Right.
say like the Lakers are 8, right, and they play the 7 seed and they win, then they're the 7 seed and they play against Memphis,
Right.
right? But if they lose against the 7-8 matchup, then they have to beat whoever the winner of 9-10 is, right?
Right.
But if you're 9-10, you have to win that matchup, and then you still have to beat the loser of 7 or 8 just to be 8,
Yep.
right? So that's why 7-8 is what your target should be, so that
Yeah.
that way you're not automatically just forced to be the 8th seed.
Right.
And you have to beat 2 teams, right? You have
It's
you have to
crucial.
win twice. Yeah, you have to win twice just to be the 8th seed. Versus if you're 7-8, you win one time and you're the 7th seed, which is I think probably more helpful than the 7th seed than the 8th seed. And
Yeah.
I think if you're the 2 seed or 2-7 matchup, I think that's a little bit more of a favorable bracket, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're 8, right, and you play Denver, let's say you upset Denver, right, the mother of all upsets, you'd still probably have to face one of Phoenix, the Clippers, or the Warriors in round 2, right? Let's say the Warriors win a few more games and maybe they pass the Clippers for that 5 spot, right? Then you'd have to face them in round 2 on the road, right? And that would again be another tough matchup. But
Yeah.
you know, but that's why, like I said, just with all those things working against them, that's why I have them in the dark horse. But we still haven't seen a whole lot of them, so you never
Exactly.
know.
Yeah. I'm super excited for this, man. Playoffs are going to be so lit.
So now to just kind of wrap up, we're just gonna kind of go through a couple of, a few news segments. So Tim Bontemps of ESPN had an NBA straw or MVP straw pullout, and the results were pretty funny,
Hmm.
in my opinion. And I'm almost kind of half rooting for this scenario to happen. So,
Okay.
um, so according to the straw poll, so Embiid has actually overtaken Jokic as the MVP, according to I guess the ESPN people, right?
Hmm.
But it's actually really funny. So he edges him in total points, but it's really close, 790 points to 788. But
Okay.
the reasoning is actually hilarious because Jokic actually has more first place votes than Embiid. He has 42 compared to 40 for Embiid. But the
Okay.
difference is that Embiid has more second place votes,
Oh,
45 compared to 39 for Jokic, right? So that's why he has the lead. So it's kind of a weird situation, almost electoral college type situation where
yeah.
I'm almost half rooting for. Where could you imagine like if Embiid wins the MVP, but he actually got fewer first place votes than Jokic? That would be crazy.
Yeah. I wouldn't even know what to say about that. I would immediately just start demanding that the structure of MVP voting is changed immediately because Jokic is the MVP, and I don't care what anyone has to say. I'll never say Embiid is the MVP, even if he wins it. There's no shot. I can't do it.
All right. So you're gonna stop the count.
Yeah, I'm going to literally stop the count. I'm going to go on Twitter. I'm going to do everything. I'm sure
All
I could
right.
rally up some protesters.
Okay. All right. Moving on. So according to Shams Charania, we got your Wizards in some news, some big news. So
Oh,
apparently,
great.
they are going over extension talks for Porzingis.
Okay.
Um, it seems like part of a larger conversation where it seems like they're going to extend both him and Kuz, but
Okay.
the report was more so tied to Porzingis.
Okay.
He's had a really good season, I think, for you guys, right? He's
Yeah.
definitely bounced back from what happened in Dallas, right? In Dallas, it kind of felt like he was sort of a lost cause, damaged goods, right? He had a lot of issues staying healthy, right? And when he was out there, it just felt kind of just weird,
Right.
right? It seemed like him and Luca didn't necessarily have the greatest relationship, but I think he's done a really good job in Washington, right? They started off the season pretty well, right? Then I think they had some issues with injuries,
Yeah. Beal was
and
out for
other
a long
stuff.
time.
But yeah, but overall, he's had a terrific season. I think it makes sense if you want to keep this core, this strange core of guys together, right? Obviously, obviously you don't want to let them walk.
Right.
So I think this makes sense.
Yeah, and for me, this is just me and my opinion as a Wizards fan. Here's what I would do. I would say, obviously, Beal's locked up. Not literally, not literally. Beal is locked up in his contract. Then you've got Porzingis. I think you can't let him go, no matter what. With Kuzma, I think there's a little bit of leeway there, and the reason why, here's what I would do. If I'm the Wizards, I'm moving Denny to the point guard. Let him run the one. I'm being serious. I'm being
Oh
serious.
yeah,
Let him run
I'm
the
curious.
one and give him some kind of Luka Doncic-esque keys to the offense. And it has potential, and he's been playing the best basketball of his life in the past few games. I think he put up 20, 25 and like 10 maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was a double-double, and I think he has 11 on the season. But he could easily be our point guard and solve our woes that we've been having for years. But yeah, I think Kuz is the one that you can let walk maybe, but you cannot let Porzingis go no matter what, because I think he's turned it around in the right direction, and I'm just so thankful it's in Washington.
I guess the question with the Kuz situation is kind of just, what is the number, right? Are you paying him like around 20 million a year, right? Or are you paying him like around 25? I
Right.
don't know necessarily what his contract's going to be. It's definitely going to be more than what it is right now. I think it's like around
17.
13,
Okay.
14. Yeah, it's not a ton. I
Yeah.
remember because when the Lakers did the extension, it wasn't a ton of money, but he'll obviously make more than what he's making right now.
Yeah, and I was saying that to say that they should extend Denny. That's what I was trying to say. I was trying to say
I mean,
extend Avdia.
yeah, I guess for the Kuz thing, I guess it's just I don't usually like the idea of kind of just letting guys walk, right?
Yeah, me neither.
Obviously you'd like to do a sign and trade, but it's not always in the cards, right? If the team he goes to has cap space, they can just sign him outright. Um, but again, with the Wizards, then you kind of run into the issue of, all right, well, if you pay Kuz and you pay Porzingis, and then maybe you pay Avdia, you're already paying Beal, right? Maybe you have to pay Johnny Davis down the road or something like that.
Why would you bring
Well,
him up? Why would you
the
bring
team
him up?
the team is just gonna get really expensive. So it's just like I do kind of wonder, like, what is the plan for the Wizards moving forward, right? Because it feels just kind of weird to spend so much money on a roster that I just don't necessarily know what the ceiling is, right? Right now they're I think 12th in the Eastern Conference. And the East is, hasn't the top of it's been great. But at the same time, right, the East could easily get better next year, right? I think
Yeah.
there's a couple of teams, that maybe in a few years, right, could be really good, right? Orlando, right? Assuming they, Paolo keeps developing and they, get some more young talent, right? They could be
Right.
really good. But maybe Detroit in a few years if they get some more guys. I don't know. It's just a situation where I do kind of wonder money wise what they're gonna do. Just because I think both of those guys are good. I definitely think Porzingis should be extended because I think he's been great for them. But Kuz I think should get paid too. But again, I don't know if it's gonna continue to be with the Wizards. They've been saying that he's gonna stay and that he's gonna get extended. I just do kind of wonder what number it's gonna be.
Yeah. Well, in regards to, spending on money on a roster that you don't know if they're going to make it anywhere, welcome to Washington sports. It happens in all of them. So, if you're not familiar with that, welcome to Washington.
For the last news segment, we got some more people enshrined in this year's Hall of Fame class. Some pretty big names, obviously, right? Dwayne Wade,
Yeah.
obviously for the Heat, right? Dirk Nowitzki, Pau Gasol, Tony Parker. And then coaches Becky Hammon and Greg Popovich, right? So a pretty big collection of talent there, right? All those guys are really terrific. And girls, right? Becky Hammon as well.
Yep.
So I mean, the last few years, it's definitely been kind of cool, seeing these big names being enshrined, right? Because a lot of these guys, are people that we watched, obviously, but more so like at the midway later point in their careers, right? Because I think we were pretty young, I think, when Wade
Yeah.
first came into the league, um, right? But obviously, as we watched the league more, right, he was still a really good player, but he wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily the same as he once was, right? Same with Dirk, same with Tony Parker, right? Even say Gasol. But obviously these guys were, incredible players. So I think it's pretty cool to to see these opportunities for these guys to get in, right? Gasol already has his jersey retired with the Lakers, which I think makes a ton of sense, right? He was one of their best players,
Nowitzki
won
has
two
the
titles with
statues
them.
or the
Yeah,
statue.
exactly. So yeah, he was really great for the Lakers. So I just think it's pretty cool to just see all these big names get in. And and again, as more people, retire, over the next few years, we're gonna see some more big names come in, obviously. So, it's always cool to see these people get recognition for what they do.
Yeah. I think everyone who you name definitely deserves to be on, in this Hall of Fame class, and happy for them because, like you said, these are kind of our childhood people that we kind of grew up with when we were watching the NBA. To put it in perspective, I think I was 11 when Dirk won the championship. I think my math might be wrong, but I think I was 11 when they won the championship, when Dallas did. So that puts it into perspective. So it's cool, and like I said, they're all deserving. So kudos to them.
That's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate the support for all the shorts and the podcasts that we do. So thanks for listening. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.